Sam Hall by Poul Anderson. Click, bzzz, whir. Citizen blank blank, Anytown, somewhere USA, approaches the hotel desk. Single with bath. Sorry, sir, our fuel ration doesn't permit individual baths. One can be drawn for you. That will be $25 extra. Oh, is that all? Okay. Citizen blank reaches into his pocket with an automatic gesture and withdraws his punched card and gives it to the registry machine. Aluminum jaws close on it. Copper teeth feel for the holes. Electronic tongue tastes the life of Citizen blank. Place and date of birth, parents, race, religion, educational, military, and civilian service records, marital status, occupations up to and including current one, affiliations, physical measurements, fingerprints, retinals, blood type, basic psychotype, loyalty rating, loyalty index as a function of time to moment of last checkup. Click, click, bzz. Why are you here, sir? Salesman. I expect to be in New Pittsburgh tomorrow night. The clerk, 32 years married, 2 children, N.B. confidential, Jewish, to be kept out of key occupations, punches the buttons. Click, click. The machine returns the card. Citizen blank puts it back in his wallet. Front. The bellboy, 19 years, unmarried, N.B. confidential, Catholic, to be kept out of key occupations, takes the guest's trunk. The elevator creaks upstairs. The clerk resumes his reading. The article is entitled, Has Britain Betrayed Us? Other articles in the magazine include New Indoctrination Program for the Armed Forces, Labor Hunting on Mars, I Was a Union Man for the Security Police, New Plans for Your Future. The machine talks to itself. Click, click. The tube winks at its neighbor as if they shared a private joke. The total signal goes out over the wires. With 1,000 other signals, it shoots down the last cable and into the sorter unit of Central Records. Click, click, bzz, whir. Wink and glow. A scanner sweeps through the memory circuits. The distorted molecules of one spool show the pattern of Citizen blank blank, and this is sent back. It enters the comparison unit, to which the incoming signal corresponding to Citizen blank blank has also been shunted. The two are perfectly in phase, nothing wrong. Citizen blank blank is staying in the town where last night he said he would, so he has not had to file a correction. The new information is added to the record of Citizen blank blank. The whole of his life returns to the memory bank. It is wiped from the scanner and comparison units so that these may be free for the next arriving signal. The machine has swallowed and digested another day. It is content. Thornburg came into his office at the usual time. His secretary glanced up to say good morning and looked closer. She had been with him for enough years to read the nuances in his carefully controlled face. Anything wrong, Chief? No. He spoke it harshly, which was also peculiar. No, nothing wrong. I feel a bit under the weather, maybe. Oh, the secretary nodded. You learn discretion in the government. Well, I hope you get better soon. Thanks. It's nothing. Thornburg limped over to his desk, sat down, and took out a pack of cigarettes. He held one for a moment in nicotine-yellowed fingers before lighting it, and there was an emptiness in his eyes. Then he puffed ferociously and turned to his mail. As chief technician of Central Records, he received a generous tobacco ration and used all of it. The office was not large, a windowless cubicle furnished with gaunt orderliness, its only decoration a picture of his son and one of his late wife. Thornburg seemed too big for it. He was tall and lean, with thin, straight features and neatly brushed graying hair. He wore a plain version of the security uniform, with his insignia of technical division and major's rank, but no other decoration, none of the ribbons to which he was entitled. The priesthood of Matilda the Machine were a pretty informal lot for these days. He chain-smoked his way through the mail, routine stuff, most of it, having to do with the necessary changeovers for installing the new identification system. Come on, June, he said to his secretary. Irrationally, he preferred dictating to her rather than to a recorder. Let's get this out of the way fast. I've got work to do. He held one letter before him, To Senator E.W. Harmison, S.O.B., New Washington, Dear Sir, in your communication of the 14th inst., requesting my personal opinion of the new ID system, may I say that it is not a technician's business to express opinions. The directive ordering that every citizen shall have one number applying to all his papers and functions, birth certificate, education, rations, Social Security service, etc., has obviously long-range advantages, but naturally entails a good deal of work in reconverting all our electronic records. The President, having decided that the gain in the long run justifies the present difficulties, it behooves all citizens to obey. Yours, and so forth. He smiled with a certain coldness. There. That'll fix him. I don't know what good Congress is anyway, except to plague honest bureaucrats. Privately, June decided to modify the letter. Maybe a senator was only a rubber stamp, but you couldn't brush him off so curtly. It is part of a secretary's job to keep the boss out of trouble. Okay, let's get to the next, said Thornburg. To Colonel M.R. Hubert, Director of Liaison Division, Central Records Agency, Security Police, etc. Dear Sir, in your memorandum of the 14th inst. Requiring a definite date for completion of the ID conversion, may I respectfully state that it is impossible for me honestly to set one. It is necessary for us to develop a memory modification unit which will make the changeover in all our records without our having to take out and alter each of the 300 million or so spools in the machine. You realize that one cannot predict the exact time needed to complete such a project. However, research is progressing satisfactorily. Refer him to my last report, will you? And I can confidently say that conversion will be finished and all citizens notified of their numbers within 2 months at the latest. Respectfully, and so on. Put that in a nice form, June. She nodded. Thornburg went on through his mail, throwing most of it into a basket for her to answer alone. When he was done, he yawned and lit another cigarette. Praise Allah, that's over. Now I can get down to the lab. You have some afternoon appointments, she reminded him. I'll be back after lunch. See you. He got up and went out of the office. Down an escalator to a still lower subterranean level along a corridor, returning the salutes of passing technicians without thinking about it. His face was immobile, and perhaps only the stiff swinging of his arms said anything. Jimmy, he thought. Jimmy, kid. He entered the guard chamber, pressing hand and eye to the scanners in the farther door. Finger and retinal patterns were his pass. No alarm sounded. The door opened for him, and he walked into the temple of Matilda. She crouched hugely before him, tier upon tier of control panels, instruments, blinking lights, like an Aztec pyramid. The gods murmured within her and winked red eyes at the tiny man who crawled over her monstrous flanks. Thornburg stood for a moment, regarding the spectacle. Then he smiled, a tired smile creasing his face along one side. A sardonic memory came back to him. Book-legged stuff from the 40s and 50s of the last century which he had read. French, German, British, Italian. The intellectuals had been all hot and bothered about the Americanization of Europe, the crumbling of old culture before the mechanized barbarism of soft drinks, advertising, chrome-plated automobiles, dollar grins, the Danes had called them, chewing gum, plastics. None of them had protested the simultaneous Europeanization of America. Government control, a military caste, light years of bureaucratic records and red tape, censors, secret police, nationalism, and racialism. Oh, well. But, Jimmy boy, where are you now? What are they doing to you? Thornburg went over to the bench where his best engineer, Rodney, was testing a unit. How's it coming? He asked. Pretty good, Chief, said Rodney. He didn't bother to salute. Thornburg had, in fact, forbidden it in the labs as a waste of time. A few bugs yet, but we're getting them out. You had to have a gimmick which would change numbers without altering anything else. Not too easy a task when the memory banks depended on individual magnetic domains. Okay, said Thornburg. Look, I'm going up to the main controls. Going to run a few tests myself. Some of the tubes have been acting funny over in Section 13. Want an assistant? No, thanks. I just want not to be bothered. Thornburg resumed his way across the floor, its hardness echoing dully under his shoes. The main controls were in a special armored booth nestling against the great pyramid, and he had to be scanned again before the door opened for him. Not many were allowed in here. The complete archives of the nation were too valuable to take chances with. Thornburg's loyalty rating was AAB2, not absolutely perfect, but the best available among men of his professional caliber. His last drug checkup had revealed certain doubts and reservations about government policy, but there was no question of disobedience. Prima facie, he was certainly bound to be loyal. He had served with distinction in the war against Brazil, losing a leg in action. His wife had been killed in the abortive Chinese rocket raids 10 years ago. His son was a rising young Space Guard officer on Venus. He had read and listened to forbidden stuff, blacklisted books, underground and foreign propaganda. But then every intellectual dabbled with that. It was not a serious offense if your record was otherwise good and if you laughed off what the prohibited things said. He sat for a moment regarding the control board inside the booth. Its complexity would have baffled most engineers, but he had been with Matilda so long that he didn't even need the reference tables. Well, it took nerve, this. A hypno-quiz was sure to reveal what he was about to do, but such raids were necessarily in a random pattern. It was unlikely that he would be called up again for years, especially with his rating. By the time he was found out, Jack should have risen far enough in the guard ranks to be safe. In the privacy of the booth, Thornburg permitted himself a harsh grin. "This," he murmured to the machine, "will hurt me worse than it does you." He began punching buttons. There were circuits installed which could alter the records, take out an entire one, and write whatever was desired in the magnetic fields. Thornburg had done the job a few times for high officials. Now, he was doing it for himself. Jimmy Obrenowitz, son of his second cousin, hustled off at night by security police on suspicion of treason. The record showed what no private citizen was supposed to know. Jimmy was in Camp Fieldstone. Those who returned from there were very quiet and said nothing about where they had been. Sometimes they were incapable of speech. It wouldn't do for the chief of Central Records to have a relative in Fieldstone. Thornburg punched buttons for half an hour, erasing, changing. It was a tough job. He had to go back several generations, altering lines of descent. But when he was through, Jimmy Obrenowitz was no relation whatsoever to the Thornburgs. And I thought the world of that kid. But I'm not doing it for myself, Jimmy. It's for Jack. When the cops go through your file later today, no doubt, I can't let them find out you're related to Captain Thornburg on Venus and a friend of his father. He slapped the switch that returned the spool to its place in the memory bank. With this act do I disown thee. After that, he sat for a while, relishing the quiet of the booth and the clean impersonality of the instruments. He didn't even want to smoke. So now they were going to give every citizen a number, tattooed on him, no doubt. One number for everything. Thornburg foresaw popular slang referring to the numbers as brands, and security cracking down on those who used the term. Disloyal language. Well, the underground was dangerous. It was supported by foreign countries who didn't like an American-dominated world. At least, not one dominated by today's kind of America. Though once USA had meant hope, the rebels were said to have their own base out in space somewhere and to have honeycombed the country with their agents. It could be. Their propaganda was subtle. We don't want to overthrow the nation. We only want to liberate it. We want to restore the Bill of Rights. It could attract a lot of unstable souls. But security's spy hunt was bound to drag in any number of citizens who had never meditated treason. Like Jimmy. Or had Jimmy been an undergrounder after all? You never knew. Nobody ever told you. There was a sour taste in Thornburg's mouth. He grimaced. A line of a song came back to him. I hate you one and all. How had it gone? They used to sing it in his college days. Something about a very bitter character who'd committed a murder. Oh, yes. Sam Hall. How did it go now? You needed a gravelly bass to sing it properly. Oh, my name, it is Sam Hall. It is Sam Hall. Yes, my name, it is Sam Hall. It is Sam Hall. Oh, my name, it is Sam Hall. And I hate you one and all. Yes, I hate you one and all. God damn your eyes. That was it. And Sam Hall was about to swing for murder. He remembered now. He felt like Sam Hall himself. He looked at the machine and wondered how many Sam Halls were in it. Idly postponing his return to work, he punched for the file, name Samuel Hall, no other specifications. The machine mumbled to itself. Presently it spewed out a file of papers micro-printed on the spot from the memory banks. Complete dossier on every Sam Hall, living and dead, from the time the records began to be kept. To hell with it. Thornburg chucked the papers down the incinerator slot. Oh, I killed a man, they say, so they say. The impulse was blinding in its savagery. They were dealing with Jimmy at this moment, probably pounding him over the kidneys, and he, Thornburg, sat here waiting for the cops to requisition Jimmy's file. And there was nothing he could do. His hands were empty. By God, he thought, I'll give them Sam Hall. His fingers began to race. He lost his nausea in the intricate technical problem. Slipping a fake spool into Matilda, it wasn't easy. You couldn't duplicate numbers, and every citizen had a lot of them. You had to account for every day of his life. Well, some of that could be simplified. The machine had only existed for 25 years. Before then, the files had been kept on paper in a dozen different offices. Let's make Sam Hall a resident of New York. His dossier there lost in the bombing 30 years ago. Such of his papers as were on file in New Washington had also been lost in the Chinese attack. That meant he simply reported as much detail as he could remember, which needn't be a lot. Let's see. Sam Hall was an English song, so Sam Hall should be British himself. Came over with his parents, 38 years ago, when he was only 3, and naturalized with them. That was before the total ban on immigration. Grew up on New York's Lower East Side, a tough kid, a slum kid. School records lost in the bombing. But he claimed to have gone through the 10th grade. No living relatives, no family, no definite occupation, just a series of unskilled jobs. Loyalty rating BBA 0, which meant that purely routine questions showed him to have no political opinions at all that mattered. Too colorless. Give him some violence in his background. Thornburg punched for information on New York police stations and civilian police officers destroyed in the last raids. He used them as the source of records that Sam Hall had been continually in trouble. Drunkenness, disorderly conduct, brawls, a suspicion of holdups and burglary, but not strong enough to warrant calling in security's hypnotechnicians for quizzing him. Better make him 4F. No military service. Reason? Well, a slight drug addiction. Men weren't so badly needed nowadays that hopheads had to be cured. Neo-coke. That didn't impair the faculties too much. Indeed, the addict was abnormally fast and strong under the influence, though there was a tough reaction afterwards. Then he would have had to put in a term in civilian service. Let's see. He spent his 3 years as a common laborer on the Colorado Dam project. So many men had been involved there that no one would have remembered him, or at least it would be hard finding a supervisor who did. Now to fill in. Thornburg used a number of automatic machines to help him. Every day in 25 years had to be accounted for, but of course the majority would show no travel or change of residence. Thornburg punched for cheap hotels housing, many at a time. No record would be kept there, everything being filed in Matilda, and no one would remember a shabby individual patron. Sam Hall's present address was given as the Triton, a glorified flophouse on the east side not far from the craters. At present, unemployed, doubtless living off past savings. Oh, blast. It was necessary to file income tax returns. Thornburg did so. Physical ID. Make him of average height, stocky, black-haired and black-eyed, a bent nose and a scar on his forehead. Tough-looking. but not enough so to make him especially memorable. Thornburg filled in the precise measurements. It wasn't hard to fake fingerprint and retinal patterns. He threw in a sensor circuit so he wouldn't accidentally duplicate anyone else. When he was done, Thornburg leaned back and sighed. There were plenty of holes yet in the record, but he could fill them in at his leisure. It had been a couple of hours' hard, concentrated work, utterly pointless, except that he had blown off steam. He felt a lot better. He glanced at his watch. Time to get back on the job, son. For a rebellious moment, he wished no one had ever invented clocks. They had made possible the science he loved, but they had then proceeded to mechanize man. Oh, well, too late now. He got up and went out of the booth. The door closed itself behind him. It was about a month later that Sam Hall committed his first murder. The night before, Thornburg had been at home. His rank entitled him to good housing, even if he did live alone, 2 rooms and bath on the 98th floor of a unit in town, not far from the camouflaged entrance to Matilda's underground domain. The fact that he was in security, even if he didn't belong to the manhunting branch, gave him so much added deference that he often felt lonely. The superintendent had even offered him his daughter once. "Only 23, sir. Just released by a gentleman of marshal's rank and looking for a nice patron, sir." Thornburg had refused, trying not to be prissy about it. Autre temp, autre mort. But still, she wouldn't have had any choice about getting client status, the first time anyway, and Thornburg's marriage had been a long and happy one. He had been looking through his bookshelves for something to read. The Literary Bureau had lately been trumpeting Whitman as an early example of Americanism, but though Thornburg had always liked the poet, his hands strayed perversely to the dog-eared volume of Marlowe. Was that escapism? The LB was very down on escapism. Oh, well, these were tough times. It wasn't easy to belong to the nation which was enforcing peace on a sullen world. You had to be realistic and energetic and all the rest, no doubt. The phone buzzed. He went over and clicked on the receiver. Martha Obrenowitz's plain, plump face showed in the screen. Her gray hair was wild, and her voice was a harsh croak. Hello, he said uneasily. He hadn't called her since the news of her son's arrest. "How are you?" "Jimmy is dead," she told him. He stood for a long while. His skull felt hollow. "I got word today that he died in camp," said Martha. "I thought you'd want to know." Thornburg shook his head back and forth very slowly. "That isn't news I ever wanted, Martha," he said. "It isn't right," she shrieked. "Jimmy wasn't a traitor. I knew my own son. Who ought to know him better? He had some friends I was kind of doubtful of, but Jimmy, he would never—" Something cold formed in Thornburg's breast. You never knew when calls were being tapped. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said without tone, "but the police are very careful about these things. They wouldn't act till they were sure. Justice is one of our traditions." She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes held a hard glitter. "You too," she said at last. "Be careful, Martha," he warned her. "I know it's a blow to you, but don't say anything you might regret later. After all, Jimmy may have died accidentally. Those things happen." "I forgot," she said jerkily. "You are in security yourself." "Be calm," he said. "Think of it as a sacrifice for the national interest." She switched off on him. He knew she wouldn't call him again, and it wouldn't be safe to see her. "Goodbye, Martha," he said aloud. It was like a stranger speaking. He turned back to the bookshelf. "Not for me," he told himself thinly. "For Jack." He touched the binding of Leaves of Grass. "Oh, Whitman, old rebel," he thought, with a curious dry laughter in him. "Are they calling you Whirling Walt now?" That night he took an extra sleeping pill. His head still felt fuzzy when he reported for work, and after a while he gave up trying to answer the mail and went down to the lab. While he was engaged with Rodney and making a poor job of understanding the technical problem under discussion, His eyes strayed to Matilda. Suddenly he realized what he needed for a cathartic. He broke off as soon as possible and went into the main control booth. For a moment he paused at the keyboard. The day-by-day creation of Sam Hall had been an odd experience. He, quiet and introverted, had shaped a rowdy life and painted a rugged personality. Sam Hall was more real to him than many of his associates. Well, I'm a schizoid type myself. Maybe I should have been a writer. No, that would have meant too many restrictions, too much fear of offending the censor. He had done exactly as he pleased with Sam Hall. He drew a deep breath and punched for unsolved murders of security officers, New York City area, within the last month. They were surprisingly common. Could it be that dissatisfaction was more general than the government admitted? But when the bulk of a nation harbors thoughts labeled treasonous, does the label still apply? He found what he wanted. Sergeant Brady had incautiously entered the Crater District after dark on the 27th of last month on a routine checkup mission. He had worn the black uniform, presumably to give himself the full weight of authority. The next morning he had been found in an alley with his head bashed in. Oh, I killed a man, they say, so they say. Yes, I killed a man, they say, so they say. I beat him on the head, and I left him there for dead. Yes, I left him there for dead. God damn his eyes. Newspapers had no doubt deplored this brutality perpetrated by the traitorous agents of enemy powers. Oh, the parson, he did come, he did come. A number of suspects had been rounded up at once and given a stiff quizzing. And the sheriff, he came too, he came too. There had been nothing proven as yet, though one Joe Nikolsky, fifth-generation American, mechanic, married, 4 children, underground pamphlets found in his room, had been arrested yesterday on suspicion. Thornburg sighed. He knew enough of security methods to be sure they would get somebody for such a killing. They couldn't allow their reputation for infallibility to be smirched by a lack of conclusive evidence. Maybe Nikolsky had done the crime. He couldn't prove he had simply been out for a walk that evening. And maybe he hadn't. But hell's fire, why not give him a break? He had 4 kids. With such a black mark, their mother could find work only in a recreation house. Thornburg scratched his head. This had to be done carefully. Let's see. Brady's body would have been cremated by now, but of course there had been a thorough study first. Thornburg withdrew the dead man's file from the machine and microprinted a replica of the evidence. Nothing. Erasing that, he inserted the statement that a blurred thumbprint had been found on the victim's collar and referred to ID labs for reconstruction. In the ID file, he inserted the report of such a job, finished only yesterday due to a great press of work. True enough, they had been busy lately on materials sent from Mars, seized in a raid on a rebel meeting place. The probable pattern of the whorls was, and here he inserted, Sam Hall's right thumb. He returned the spools and leaned back in his chair. It was risky. If anyone thought to check with the ID lab, he was done for. But that was unlikely. The chances were that New York would accept the findings with a routine acknowledgement which some clerk at the lab would file without studying. The more obvious dangers were not too great either. A busy police force would not stop to ask if any of their fingerprint men had actually developed that smudge. And as for hypnoquizzing showing Nikolsky really was the murderer, well, then the print would be assumed that of a passerby who had found the body without reporting it. So now Sam Hall had killed a security officer, grabbed him by the neck and smashed his skull with a weighted club. Thornburg felt a lot better. New York security shot a request to Central Records for any new material on the Brady case. An automaton received it, compared the codes, and saw that fresh information had been added. The message flashed back, together with a dossier on Sam Hall and 2 others, for the reconstruction could not be absolutely accurate. The other 2 men were safe enough, as it turned out. Both had alibis. The squad that stormed into the Triton Hotel and demanded Sam Hall were met with blank stares. No such person was registered. No one of that description was known there. A thorough quizzing corroborated this. So Sam Hall had managed to fake an address. He could have done that easily enough by punching the buttons on the hotel register when no one was looking. Sam Hall could be anywhere. Joe Nikolsky, having been hypnoed and found harmless, was released. The fine for possessing subversive literature would put him in debt for the next few years. He had no influential friends to get it suspended, but he'd stay out of trouble if he watched his step. Security sent out an alarm for Sam Hall. Thornburg derived a sardonic amusement from watching the progress of the hunt as it came to Matilda. No one with that ID card had bought tickets on any public transportation. That proved nothing. Of the hundreds who vanished every year, some at least must have been murdered for their ID cards and their bodies disposed of. Matilda was set to give the alarm when the ID of a disappeared person showed up somewhere. Thornburg faked a few such reports just to give the police something to do. He slept more poorly each night, and his work suffered. Once he met Martha Abrenowitz on the street, passed by hastily without greeting her, and couldn't sleep at all, even with maximum permissible drugging. The new ID system was completed. Machines sent notices to every citizen with orders to have their numbers tattooed on the right shoulder blade within 6 weeks. As each tattoo center reported that such and such person had had the job done, Matilda's robots changed the record appropriately. Sam Hall, AX 428-399-075, did not report for his tattoo. Thornburg chuckled at the AX symbol. Then the telecasts flashed a story that made the nation sit up and listen. Bandits had held up the First National Bank in Americatown, Idaho, formerly Moscow, making off with a good $5 million in assorted bills. From their discipline and equipment, it was assumed they were rebel agents, possibly having come in a spaceship from their unknown interplanetary base, and that the raid was intended to help finance their nefarious activities. Security was cooperating with the armed forces to track down the evildoers, and arrests were expected hourly, etc., etc. Thornburg went to Matilda for a complete account. It had been a bold job. The robbers had apparently worn plastic face masks and light body armor under ordinary clothes. In the scuffle of the getaway, one man's mask had slipped aside, only for a moment, but a clerk who happened to see it had, with the aid of hypnosis, given a fairly good description. A brown-haired, heavy-set fellow, Roman nose, thin lips, toothbrush mustache. Thornburg hesitated. A joke was a joke, and helping poor Nikolsky was perhaps morally defensible, but aiding and abetting a felony, which was in all likelihood an act of treason... He grinned to himself, without much humor. It was too much fun playing God. Swiftly he changed the record. The crook had been of medium height, dark, scar-faced, broken-nosed. He sat for a while wondering how sane he was, how sane anybody was. Security Central asked for the complete file on the holdup with any correlations the machine could make. It was sent to them. The description given could have been that of many men, but the scanners eliminated all but one possibility. Sam Hall. The hounds bayed forth again. That night, Thornburg slept well. Dear Dad, sorry I haven't written before, but we've been kept pretty busy here. As you know, I've been with the patrol in Gorgovashtar for the past several weeks. Desolate country, like all this blasted planet. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever see the sun again, and lakes and forests, and... Who wrote that line about the green hills of Earth? We can't get much to read out here, and sometimes my mind feels rusty. Not that I'm complaining, of course. This is a necessary job, and somebody has to do it. We'd hardly gotten back from patrol when we were called out on special duty, bundled into rockets and tossed halfway around the planet through the worst gale I've ever seen, even on Venus. If I hadn't been an officer, and therefore presumably a gentleman, I'd have upchucked. A lot of the boys did. And we were a pretty sorry crew when we landed. But we had to go into action right away. There was a strike in the thorium mines, and the local men couldn't break it. We had to use guns before we could bring them to reason. Dad, I felt sorry for the poor devils. I don't mind admitting it. rocks and hammers and sluice hoses against machine guns. And conditions in the mines are pretty rugged. They, deleted by censor, someone has to do that job too. And if no one will volunteer for any kind of pay, they have to assign civilian servicemen arbitrarily. It's for the state. Otherwise, nothing new. Life is pretty monotonous. Don't believe the adventure stories. Adventure is weeks of boredom punctuated by moments of being scared gutless. Sorry to be so brief, but I want to get this on the outbound rocket. Won't be another for a couple of months. Everything well, really. I hope the same for you, and live for the day we'll meet again. Thanks a million for the cookies. You know you can't afford to pay the freight, you old spendthrift. Martha baked them, didn't she? I recognize the Abrenowitz touch. Say hello to her and Jim for me. And most of all, my kindest thoughts go to you. As ever, Jack. The telecasts carried wanted messages for Sam Hall. No photographs of him were available, but an artist could draw an accurate likeness from Matilda's precise description, and his truculent face began to adorn public places. Not long thereafter, the security offices in Denver were blown up by a grenade tossed from a speeding car that vanished into traffic. A witness said he had glimpsed the thrower, and the fragmentary picture given under hypnosis was not unlike Sam Hall's. Thornburg doctored the record a bit to make it still more similar. The tampering was risky, of course. If security ever became suspicious, they could easily check back with their witnesses. But it was not too big a chance to take, for a scientifically quizzed man told everything germane to the subject which his memory, conscious, subconscious, and cellular held. There was never any reason to repeat such an interrogation. Thornburg often tried to analyze his own motives. Plainly enough, he disliked the government. He must have contained that hate all his life, carefully suppressed from awareness, and only recently had it been forced into his conscious mind. Not even his subconscious could have formulated it earlier, or he would have been caught by the loyalty probes. The hate derived from a lifetime of doubts. Had there been any real reason to fight Brazil other than to obtain those bases and mining concessions? Had the Chinese attack perhaps been provoked or even faked? For their government had denied it. And the million petty frustrations of the garrison state, still the strength of it, the violence. By creating Sam Hall, he had struck back. But it was an ineffectual blow, a timid gesture. Most likely, his basic motive was simply to find a halfway safe release. In Sam Hall, he lived vicariously all the things that the beast within him wanted to do. Several times he had intended to discontinue his sabotage. But it was like a drug. Sam Hall was becoming necessary to his own stability. The thought was alarming. He ought to see a psychiatrist. But no, the doctor would be bound to report his tale. He would go to camp. And Jack, if not exactly ruined, would be under a cloud for the rest of his life. Thornburg had no desire to go to camp anyway. His own existence had compensations, interesting work, a few good friends, art and music and literature, decent wine, sunsets and mountains, memories. He had started this game on impulse, but now it was too late to stop it. For Sam Hall had been promoted to public enemy number 1. Winter came, and the slopes of the Rockies under which Matilda lay were white beneath the cold greenish sky. Air traffic around the nearby town was lost in that hugeness. Brief, hurtling meteors against infinity. Ground traffic could not be seen at all from the records entrance. Thornburg took the special tubeway to work every morning, but he often walked the 5 miles back, and his Sundays were usually spent in long hikes over the slippery trails. That was a foolish thing to do alone in winter, but he felt reckless. He was working in his office shortly before Christmas when the intercom said, "Major Sorenson to see you, sir, from investigation." Thornburg felt his stomach tie itself into a cold knot. "All right," he answered in a voice whose levelness surprised him. "Cancel any other appointments." Security investigation took priority over everything. Sorenson walked in with a hard military clack of boots. He was a big, blond man, heavy-shouldered, his face expressionless, and his eyes as pale and cold and remote as the winter sky. The black uniform fitted him like another skin. The lightning badge of his service glittered against it like a frosty star. He stood stiffly before the desk, and Thornburg rose to give him an awkward salute. "Please sit down, Major Sorenson. What can I do for you?" "Thanks." The cop's voice was crisp and harsh. He lowered his bulk into a chair and drilled Thornburg with his eyes. "I've come about the Sam Hall case." "Oh? The rebel?" Thornburg's skin prickled. It was all he could do to meet those eyes. "How do you know he's a rebel?" asked Sorenson. "It's never been proved officially." "Why, I assumed that bank raid, and then the posters say he's believed to be in the underground." Sorenson inclined his cropped head ever so slightly. When he spoke again, it was in a relaxed tone, almost casual. "Tell me, Major Thornburg, have you followed the Hall dossier in detail?" Thornburg hesitated. He wasn't supposed to do so unless ordered. He only kept the machine running. A memory came back to him, something he had read once. When suspected of a major sin, admit the minor ones frankly. It disarms suspicion. Something like that. "As a matter of fact, I have," he said. "I know it's against regs, but I was interested, and, well, I couldn't see any harm in it. I've not discussed it with anyone, of course." "No matter," Sorenson waved a muscular hand. "If you hadn't done so, I'd have ordered you to. I want your opinion on this." "Why, I'm not a detective." "You know more about records, though, than anyone else. I'll be frank with you. Under the rose, naturally." Sorenson seemed almost friendly now. Was it a trick to put his prey off guard? "You see, there are some puzzling features about this case." Thornburg kept silent. He wondered if Sorenson could hear the thudding of his heart. "Sam Hall is a shadow," said the cop. "The most careful checkups eliminate any chance of his being identical with anyone else of that name. In fact, we've learned that the name occurs in a violent old drinking song. Is it coincidence, or did the song suggest crime to Sam Hall? Or did he, by some incredible process, get that alias into his record instead of his real name? Whatever the answer there, we know that he's ostensibly without military training, yet he's pulled off some beautiful pieces of precision attack. His IQ is only 110, but he evades all our traps. He has no politics, yet he turns on security without warning. We have not been able to find one person who remembers him. Not one. And believe me, we have been thorough. Oh, there are a few subconscious memories which might be of him, but probably aren't. And so aggressive a personality should be remembered consciously. No undergrounder or foreign agent we've caught had any knowledge of him, which defies probability. The whole business seems impossible." Thornburg licked his lips. Sorenson, the hunter of men, must know he was frightened. But would he assume it to be the normal nervousness of a man in the presence of a security officer? Sorenson's face broke into a hard smile. "As Sherlock Holmes once remarked," he said, "when you have eliminated every other hypothesis, then the one which remains, however improbable, must be the right one." Despite himself, Thornburg was jolted. Sorenson hadn't struck him as a reader. "Well," he asked slowly, "what is your remaining hypothesis?" The other man watched him for a long time, it seemed forever, before replying. "The underground is more powerful and widespread than people realize. They've had some 70 years to prepare, and there are many good brains in their ranks. They carry on scientific research of their own. It's top secret, but we know they have perfected a type of weapon we cannot duplicate yet. It seems to be a handgun throwing bolts of energy, a blaster, you might call it, of immense power. Sooner or later, they're going to wage open war against the government." Now, could they have done something comparable in psychology? Could they have found a way to erase or cover up memories selectively, even on the cellular level? Could they know how to fool a personality tester, how to disguise the mind itself? If so, there may be any number of Sam Halls in our very midst, undetectable until the moment comes for them to strike. Thornburg felt almost boneless. He couldn't help gasping his relief, and hoped Sorenson would take it for a sign of alarm. The possibility is frightening, isn't it? The blond man laughed harshly. You can't imagine what is being felt in high official circles. We've put all the psychological researchers we could get to work on the problem. Bah, fools. They go by the book. They're afraid to be original even when the state tells them to. It may just be a wild fancy, of course. I hope it is. But we have to know. That's why I approached you personally instead of sending the usual requisition. I want you to make a search of the records. Everything pertaining to the subject, every man, every discovery, every hypothesis. You have a broad technical background and from your psycho record an unusual amount of creative imagination. I want you to do what you can to correlate all your data. Co-opt anybody you need. Submit to my office a report on the possibility, or should I say, probability of this notion. And if there is any likelihood of its being true, sketch out a research program which will enable us to duplicate the results and counteract them. Thornburg fumbled for words. I'll try, he said lamely. I'll do my best. Good. It's for the state. Sorenson had finished his official business, but he didn't go at once. Rebel propaganda is subtle stuff, he said quietly, after a pause. It's dangerous, because it uses our own slogans with a twisted meaning. Liberty, equality, justice, peace. Too many people can't appreciate that times have changed and the meanings of words have necessarily changed with them. I suppose not, said Thornburg. He added the lie. I never thought much about it. You should, said Sorenson. Study your history. When we lost World War III, we had to militarize to win World War IV. And after that, for our own safety, we had to mount guard on the whole human race. The people demanded it at the time. The people, thought Thornburg, never appreciated freedom till they'd lost it. They were always willing to sell their birthright. Or was it merely that, being untrained in thinking, they couldn't see through demagoguery, couldn't visualize the ultimate consequences of their wishes? He was vaguely shocked at the thought. Wasn't he able to control his own mind any longer? The rebels, said Sorenson, claim that conditions have changed. The militarization is no longer necessary, if it ever was, and that America would be safe enough in a union of free countries. It's devilishly clever propaganda. Major Thornburg, watch out for it. He got up and took his leave. Thornburg sat for a long time staring after the door. Sorenson's last words were odd, to say the least. Was it a hint, or was it bait in a trap? The next day, Matilda received a news item whose details were carefully censored for the public channels. A rebel force had landed in the stockade of Camp Jackson in Utah, gunned down the guards and taken away the prisoners. The camp doctor had been spared and related that the leader of the raid, a stocky man in a mask, had ironically said to him, "Tell your friends I'll call again. My name is Sam Hall." Space Guard ship blown up on Mesa Verde Field. On a fragment of metal someone had scrawled, "Compliments of Sam Hall." Army Quartermaster Depot robbed of $1 million. Bandit chief says before disappearing that he is Sam Hall. Squad of security police raiding a suspected underground hideout in New Pittsburgh, cut down by machine gun fire. Voice over hidden loudspeaker cries, "My name, it is Sam Hall." Dr. Matthew Thompson, chemist in Seattle, suspected of underground connections, is gone when his home is raided. Note left on desk says, "Off to visit Sam Hall. Back for liberation. MT." defense plant producing important row-bomb parts blown up near Miami by small atomic bomb. After being warned over the phone that the bomb has been planted and they have half an hour to get their workers out, the caller, masked, styles himself Sam Hall. Army Laboratory in Houston given similar warning by Sam Hall. A fake, but a day's valuable work is lost in the alarm and the search. Scribbled on walls from New York to San Diego, from Duluth to El Paso, Sam Hall, Sam Hall, Sam Hall. Obviously, thought Thornburg, the underground had seized on the invisible and invincible man of legend and turned him to their own purposes. Reports of him poured in from all over the country, hundreds every day. Sam Hall seen here, Sam Hall seen there. 99% could be dismissed as hoaxes, hallucinations, mistakes. It was another national craze, fruit of a jittery time, like the 16th and 17th century witch hunts or the 20th century flying saucers. But security and civilian police had to check on every one. Thornburg planted a number of them himself. Mostly, though, he was busy with his assignment. He could understand what it meant to the government. Life in the garrison state was inevitably founded on fear and mistrust, every man's eye on his neighbor. But at least psychotyping and hypnoquizzing had given a degree of surety. Now, with that stuff knocked out from under them. His preliminary studies indicated that a discovery such as Sorenson had hypothesized, while not impossible, was too far beyond the scope of modern science for the rebels to have perfected. Such research carried on nowadays would, from the standpoint of practicality, if not of knowledge, be a waste of time and trained men. He spent a good many sleepless hours and used up a month's cigarette ration before he could decide what to do. All right, he'd aided insurrection in a small way, and he shouldn't boggle at the next step. Still, nevertheless, did he want to? Jack, the boy had a career lined out for himself. He loved the big deeps beyond the sky as he would love a woman. If things changed, what then of Jack's career? Well, what was it now? Stuck on a dreary planet as guardsman and executioner of homesick starvelings, poisoned by radioactivity, never even seeing the sun. Come the day, Jack could surely wangle a berth on a real spacer. They'd need bold men to explore beyond Saturn. Jack was too honest to make a good rebel. But Thornburg felt that after the initial shock he would welcome a new government. But treason, oaths. When in the course of human events, it was a small thing that decided Thornburg. He passed a shop downtown and noticed a group of the youth guard smashing in its windows and spattering yellow paint over the goods. Oh, Moses, Jesus, Mendelssohn, Hertz, and Einstein. Once he had taken this path, a curious serenity possessed him. He stole a vial of prussic acid from a chemist friend and carried it in his pocket. And as for Jack, the boy would have to take his chances, too. The work was demanding and dangerous. He had to alter recorded facts which were available elsewhere, in books and journals and the minds of men. Nothing could be done with basic theory, of course, but quantitative results could be juggled a little so that the overall picture was subtly askew. He would co-opt carefully chosen experts, men whose psychotypes indicated they would take the easy course of relying on Matilda instead of checking the original sources. And the correlation and integration of innumerable data, the empirical equations and extrapolations thereof, could be tampered with. He turned his regular job over to Rodney and devoted himself entirely to the new one. He grew thin and testy. When Sorenson called up trying to hurry him, he snapped back, "Do you want speed or quality?" And wasn't too surprised at himself afterward. He got little sleep, but his mind seemed unnaturally clear. Winter faded into spring while Thornburg and his experts labored and while the nation shook, psychically and physically, with the growing violence of Sam Hall. The report Thornburg submitted in May was so voluminous and detailed that he didn't think the government researchers would bother referring to any other source. Its conclusion? Yes. given a brilliant man, applying Belloni matrices to cybernetic formulas and using some unknown kind of colloidal probe, a psychological masking technique was plausible. The government yanked every man it could find into research. Thornburg knew it was only a matter of time before they realized they had been had. How much time, he couldn't say. But when they were sure, now up the rope I go, up I go. Now up the rope I go, up I go. And the bastards down below, they say, Sam, we told you so. They say, Sam, we told you so. God damn their eyes. Rebels attack. Spaceships land under cover of rainstorms. Seize points near North Detroit. Flame weapons used against Army by rebels. The infamous legions of the traitors have taken key points throughout the nation, but already our gallant forces have hurled them back. They have come out in early summer like toadstools and will wither as fast. Silence. All citizens are directed to keep calm, remain loyal to their country, and stay at their usual tasks until otherwise ordered. Civilians will report to their local defense commanders. All military reservists will report immediately for active duty. Hello, Hawaii. Are you there? Come in, Hawaii. Calling Hawaii. CQ Mars. GHQ calling. Seized Syrtis Major Colony and help needed. The lunar rocket bases are assaulted and carried. The commander blows them up rather than surrender. A pinpoint flash on the moon's face, a new crater. What will they name it? So they've got Seattle, have they? Send a row-bomb flight. Blow the place off the map. Citizens? To hell with citizens. This is war. In New York, secretly drilled rebels emerged from the notorious Crater District and stormed. Assassins were shot down. The new president has already been sworn in, and Britain, Canada, Australia refuse assistance to government. No, sir, the bombs reached Seattle all right, but they were all stopped before they hit some kind of energy gun. Komiko to all Army commanders in Florida and Georgia. Enemy action has made Florida and the Keys temporarily untenable. Army units will withdraw as follows. Today, a rebel force engaging an Army convoy in Donner Pass was annihilated by a well-placed tactical atomic bomb, though our own men suffered losses on this account. Comwayco to all Army commanders in California. The mutiny of units stationed near San Francisco poses a grave problem. SP raid rebel hideout, bag 5 officers. All right, so the enemy is about to capture Boston. We can't issue weapons to the citizens. They might turn them on us. Space Guard units expected from Venus. Jack. 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 It was strange living in the midst of a war. Thornburg had never thought it would be like this. Drawn faces, furtive eyes, utter confusion in the telecast news and the irregularly arriving papers. Blackouts, civil defense drills, shortages, occasional panic when a rebel jet whistled overhead, but nothing else. No gunfire, no bombs, no battles at all except the unreal ones you heard about. The only casualty lists here were due to security. People kept disappearing, and nobody spoke about them. But then, why should the enemy bother with this unimportant mountain town? The Army of Liberation, as it styled itself, was grabbing key points of industry, transportation, communication, was fighting military units, sabotaging buildings and machines, assassinating important men in the government. By its very purpose, it couldn't wage total war, couldn't annihilate the folk it wanted to free. Rumor had it that the defenders were not so finicky. Most citizens were passive. They always are. It is doubtful if more than 1/4 of the population was ever near a combat during the Third American Revolution. City dwellers might see fire in the sky, hear the whistle and crash of artillery, scramble out of the way of soldiers and armored vehicles, cower in shelters when the rockets thundered overhead. But the battle was fought outside town. If it came to street fighting, the rebels wouldn't push in. They would either withdraw and wait, or they would rely on agents inside the city. Then one might hear the crack of rifles and grenades, rattle of machine guns, sharp discharge of energy beams, and see corpses in the street. But it ended with the return of official military government, or with the rebels marching in and setting up their own provisional councils. They were rarely greeted with cheers and flowers. Nobody knew how the war would end, but there were words whispered to them, and they usually got good surface. As nearly as possible, the average American continued his average life. Thornburg went on his own ways. Matilda, as the information center, was working at full blast. If the rebels ever learned where she was, or did they know? He could not spare much time for his private sabotage, but he planned it carefully and made every second tell when he was alone in the control booth. Sam Hall reports, of course. Sam Hall here, Sam Hall there, pulling off this or that incredible stunt. But what did one man, even a Superman, count for in these gigantic days? Something else was needed. Radio and newspapers announced jubilantly that Venus had finally been contacted. The Moon and Mars had fallen. There was only silence from the Jovian satellites, but everything seemed in order on Venus. A few feeble uprisings had been quickly smashed. The powerful guard units there would be on their way to Earth at once. Troop transports had to orbit most of the way, so it would take a good 6 weeks before they could arrive. But when they did, they would be a powerful reinforcement. "Looks like you might see your boy soon, Chief," said Rodney. "Yes," said Thornburg, "I might." "Tough fighting," Rodney shook his head. "I'd sure as hell hate to be in it." If Jack is killed by a rebel gun when I have aided the rebels' cause... Sam Hall, reflected Thornburg, had lived a hard life. All violence and enmity and suspicion. Even his wife hadn't trusted him. "And my Nellie dressed in blue says your trifling days are through. Now I know that you'll be true. God damn your eyes." Poor Sam Hall. It was no wonder he had killed a man. Suspicion. Thornburg stood for a taut moment while an eerie tingle went through him. The police state was founded on suspicion. Nobody could trust anybody else. And with the new fear of psychomasking and research on that project suspended during the crisis, steady, boy, steady. Can't rush into this. Have to plan it out very carefully. Thornburg punched for the dossiers of key men in the administration, in the military, in security. He did it in the presence of 2 assistants, for he thought that his own frequent sessions alone in the control booth were beginning to look funny. "This is top secret," he warned them, pleased with his own cool manner. He was becoming a regular Machiavelli. "You'll be skinned alive if you mention it to anyone." Rodney gave him a shrewd glance. "So they're not even sure of their own top men now, are they?" he murmured. "I've been told to make some checks," snapped Thornburg. "That's all you need to know." He studied the files for many hours before coming to a decision. Secret observations were, of course, made of everyone from time to time. A cross-check with Matilda showed that the cop who had filed the last report on Lyndall had been killed the next day in a spontaneous and abortive uprising. The report was innocuous. Lyndall had stayed at home, studying some papers. He had been alone in the house except for a bodyguard who had been in another room and not seen him. And Lyndall was Undersecretary of Defense. Thornburg changed the record. A masked man, stocky, black-haired, had come in and talked for 3 hours with Lyndall. They had spoken low, so that the cop's ears outside the window couldn't catch what was said. The visitor had gone away then, and Lyndall had retired. The cop went back in great excitement and made out his report and gave it to the signalman, who had sent it on to Matilda. Tough on the signalman, thought Thornburg. He'll want to know why he didn't tell this to his chief in New Washington. If the observer was killed before doing so, he'll deny every such report and they'll hypnoquiz him. But they don't trust that method anymore. His sympathy didn't last long. What counted was having the war over before Jack got home. He rifled the altered spool and did a little backtracking, shifting the last report of Sam Hall from Salt Lake City to Philadelphia, making it more plausible. Then, as opportunity permitted, he did some work on the other men's records. He had to wait 2 haggard days before the next requisition came from security for a fresh cross-check on Sam Hall. The scanners swept in an intricate pattern. A cog turned over, a tube glowed, circuits were activated elsewhere. The spool Lindell was unrolled before the microprinter inside the machine. Cross-references to that spool ramified in all directions. Thornburg sent the preliminary report back with a query. This matter looked interesting. Did they want more information? They did. Next day, the telecast announced a drastic shakeup in the Department of Defense. Lindell was not heard from again. And I, thought Thornburg grimly, have grabbed a very large tiger by the tail. Now they'll have to check everybody, and I'm one man trying to keep ahead of the whole security police. Lindell is a traitor. How did his chief ever let him get on the board? Secretary Hoheimer was pretty good friends with Lindell, too. Get records to cross-check Hoheimer. What's this? Hoheimer himself? 5 years ago, yes, but even so, the records show that he lived in an apartment unit where Sam Hall was janitor. Grab Hoheimer. Who'll take his place? General Halliburton. That stupid old bastard? Well, at least his dossier is clean. Can't trust those slick characters. Hoheimer has a brother in security, general's rank. Good detection record. A blind? Who knows? Slap the brother in jail, at least for the duration. Better check his staff. Central Record shows that his chief field agent, Jones, has 5 days unaccounted for a year ago. He claimed security secrecy at the time, but a double cross-check shows it wasn't so. Shoot Jones. He has a nephew in the Army, a captain. Pull that unit out of the firing line till we can study it man by man. We've had too many mutinies already. Lindell was also a close friend of Benson, in charge of the Tennessee Atomic Ordnance Works. Haul Benson in. Check every man connected with him. No trusting those scientists. They're always blabbing secrets. The first Hoheimer's son is an industrialist. He owns a petroleum synthesis plant in Texas. Nab him. His wife is a sister of Leslie, head of the War Production Coordination Board. Get Leslie, too. Sure, he's doing a good job, but he may be sending information to the enemy. Or he may just be waiting for the signal to sabotage the whole works. We can't trust anybody, I tell you. What's this? Records relays an intelligence report that the mayor of Tampa was in cahoots with the rebels. It's marked unreliable rumor, but Tampa did surrender without a fight. The mayor's business partner is Gale, who has a cousin in the Army commanding a row-bomb base in New Mexico. Check both the Gale's records. So, the cousin was absent 4 days without filing his whereabouts. Where was he? Military privileges or not, arrest him and find out where he was. Attention records, urgent. Brigadier John Harmsworth Gale, etc., refused to divulge information required by security officers, claiming to have been at his base all the time. Can this be an error on your part? Records to Security Central, reference, etc. No possibility of error exists except in information received. 2 records, reference, etc. Gale's story corroborated by 3 of his officers. Put that whole damned base under arrest. Recheck those reports. Who sent them in anyway? 2 records, reference, etc. On attempt to arrest entire personnel, row-bomb base 37J, fired on security detachment and repulsed it. At last reports, Gale was calling for rebel forces 50 miles off to assist him. Details will follow for the files as soon as possible. So Gale was a traitor, or was he driven to it by fear? Have records, find out who filed that information about him in the first place. We can't trust anybody. Thornburg was not much surprised when his door was kicked open and the security squad entered. He had been expecting it for days now. One man can't keep ahead of the game forever. No doubt the accumulated inconsistencies had finally drawn suspicion his way. Or perhaps, ironically, the chains of accusation he had forged had by chance led to him. Or perhaps Rodney or another person here had decided something was amiss with the chief and lodged a tip. He felt no blame for whoever it was, if that had been the case. The tragedy of civil war was that it turned brother against brother. Millions of good and decent men were with the government because they had pledged themselves to be. Mostly. He felt tired. He looked down the barrel of the gun and then raised weary eyes to the hard face behind it. "I take it I'm under arrest?" he asked tonelessly. "Get up." The face was flat and brutal. There was sadism in the heavy mouth. A typical black coat. June whimpered. The man who held her was twisting her arm behind her back. "Don't do that," said Thornburg. "She's innocent." "Get up," I said. The gun thrust closer. "Don't come near me either." Thornburg lifted his right hand. It was clenched around a little ball. "See this? It's a gimmick I made. No, not a bomb, just a small radio control. If my hand relaxes, the rubber will expand and pull a switch shut." The men recoiled a little. "Let the girl go," I said, repeated Thornburg patiently. "You surrender first." June screamed as the cop twisted harder. "No," said Thornburg. "This is more important than any one of us. I was prepared, you see. I expect to die. So if I let go of this ball, the radio signal closes a relay and a powerful magnetic field is generated in Matilda, in the records machine. Every record the government has will be wiped clean. I hate to think what your fellows will do to you if you let that happen." Slowly, the cop released June. She slumped to the floor, crying. "It's a bluff," said the man with the gun. There was sweat on his face. "Try it and find out," Thornburg forced a smile. "I don't care." "You traitor!" "And a very effective one, wasn't I? I've got the government turned end for end and upside down. The army's in an uproar. Officers deserting right and left for fear they'll be arrested next. Administration is hogtied and trembling. Security is chasing its own tail around half a continent. Assassination and betrayal are daily occurrences. Men go over to the rebels in droves. The Army of Liberation is sweeping a demoralized and ineffectual resistance before it everywhere. I predict that New Washington will capitulate within a week. And you're doing, finger tense on the trigger. Oh, no. No single man can change history. But I was a rather important factor, yes. Or let's say, Sam Hall was. What are you going to do? That depends on you, my friend. If you shoot me, gas me, knock me out, or anything of that sort, my hand will naturally relax. Otherwise, we'll just wait till one side or the other gets tired. You're bluffing, snapped the squad leader. You could, of course, have the technicians here check Matilda and see if I'm telling the truth, said Thornburg. And if I am, you could have them disconnect my electromagnet. Only I warn you, at the first sign of any such operation on your part, I'll let go of this ball. Look in my mouth. He opened it. A glass vial full of poison. After I let the ball go, I'll close my teeth together hard. So you see, I have nothing to fear from you. Bafflement and rage flitted over the faces that watched him. They weren't used to thinking, those men. Of course, said Thornburg, there is one other possibility for you. At last reports, a rebel jet squadron was based not 100 miles from here. We could call it and have them come and take this place over. That might be to your advantage, too. There is going to be a day of reckoning with you blackcoats, and my influence could shield you, however little you deserve it." They stared at each other. After a very long while, the squad leader shook his head. "No." The man behind him pulled out a gun and shot him in the back. Thornburg smiled. As a matter of fact, he told Sorenson, I was bluffing. All I had was a tennis ball with a few small electrical parts glued on it. Not that it made much difference at that stage, except to me. "Matilda will be handy for us in mopping up," said Sorenson. "Want to stay on?" "Sure, at least till my son arrives. That'll be next week." "You'll be glad to hear we've finally contacted the guard in space. Just a short radio message, but the commander has agreed to obey whatever government is in power when he arrives. That'll be us, so your boy won't have to do any fighting." There were no words for that. Instead, Thornburg said with a hard-held casualness, "You know, I'm surprised that you should have been an undergrounder." "There were a few of us even in security," said Sorenson. "We were organized in small cells, spotted throughout the nation, and wangled things so we could hypno-quiz each other." He grimaced. "It wasn't a pleasant job, though. Some of the things I had to do, well, that's over with now." He leaned back in his chair, putting his booted feet on the desk. A liberation uniform was usually pretty sloppy. It didn't worry about spit and polish. But he had managed to be immaculate. "There was a certain amount of suspicion about Sam Hall at first," he said. "The song, you know, and other items. My bosses weren't stupid. I got myself detailed to investigate you. A close checkup gave me grounds to suspect you of revolutionary thoughts, so naturally I gave you a clean bill of health. Later on, I cooked up this fantasy of the psychological mask and got several high-ranking men worried about it. When you followed my lead on that, I was sure you were on our side." He grinned. "So, naturally, our army never attacked Matilda." "You must have joined your forces quite recently." "Yeah, I had to scram out of security during the uproar and witch hunt you started. You damn near cost me my life, Thorny, know that? Well worth it, though, just to see those cockroaches busily stepping on each other." Thornburg leaned gravely over his desk. "I always had to assume you rebels were sincere," he said. "I've never been sure, but now I can check up. Do you intend to destroy Matilda?" Sorenson nodded. "After we've used her to help us find some people we want rather badly, and to get reorganized, of course. She's too powerful an instrument. It's time to loosen the strings of government." "Thank you," whispered Thornburg. He chuckled after a moment. "And that will be the end of Sam Hall," he said. "He'll go to whatever Valhalla is reserved for the great characters of fiction. I can see him squabbling with Sherlock Holmes and shocking the hell out of King Arthur and striking up a beautiful friendship with Long John Silver. You know how the ballad ends?" He sang softly. "Now up in heaven I dwell, in heaven I dwell." Unfortunately, the conclusion is pretty rugged. Sam Hall never was satisfied.